If you were around during the indie game boom of the 2010s, you could not escape the name of Phil Fish or his project Fez. During a time when downloading games on consoles became viable, his project about a little character named Gomez traversing a world that was both 2D and 3D became the quintessential example of how small teams could make art pieces unlike anything from the AAA side of the industry. Unfortunately, Phil would see his reputation go from indie darling to public enemy number one, as he started getting accused of theft, victim blaming, inflammatory remarks, and colluding with an indie game dev Illuminati. This would end up causing an internet circus with Mr. Fish having a mental breakdown, getting hacked, shutting down his studio, and never making a video game again. But how the hell did this all happen around a guy who made a game about a character wearing a funny hat? Well, it's a long story, and today I want to break down his immensely fascinating tale. But to start, we'll first have to go back about 40 years. But before we go any further in today's video, I just want to give a shout out to my sponsor, Five. Ever since the 2018 Farm Bill passed, it has been federally legal to buy plenty of different types of edibles and gummies. And in my opinion, Five is the best place to buy them online, with them being shipped directly to your door. Now, I'm not the type to usually try this stuff, but will fully admit that a very small dose of these sort of gummies is helpful at relieving stress, at least for myself personally. They sent me the 5 Daily Buzz gummies and I cut one in half, and it worked very well for my purpose. So if you're interested in 21 years or older in age, please feel free to click the link on the description down below to try out Five for yourself. Phil Fish was born Philippe Poisson in 1984 and grew up in Montreal, Quebec. From a young age, Phil showed an interest in art, a passion his art school dropout parents shared and encouraged. At the age of 4, he got a Nintendo Entertainment System for Christmas, along with the games Super Mario Bros., Tetris, and The Legend of Zelda. These titles sparked a lifelong dream to eventually make his own games, one that never faltered as he grew older. His parents were more than just supportive. Phil's dad translated Zelda into French just so his son could follow along. Phil beat the game 5 times, playing it non-stop over the next 3 years. In 1990, Apple released the Macintosh Classic, which became the family's first home computer. The aspiring creative enjoyed doodling in applications like KidPix. His father frequently took these drawings to create Where's Waldo-style Spot the Object games. Before long, Phil was creating his own software, with an example being Cybervision.
And I swear to God, you start to see stuff.
It should be noted, Phil was primarily interested in the artistic side of things. His programming was quite rudimentary, as he was unable to do math. As he put it, "I am a math retard. Seriously, it's like a condition. I blame that time I fell on my head and lost consciousness when I was 4. My dad taught me just enough so I could link stuff together and trigger special events and stuff like that." A particularly influential release for the young child was 1993's Myst, a point-and-click adventure game. When I was 12, I'd make Myst clones. I didn't build playable levels. I got my kicks building environments like a kid building a fort. He once created a maze for his dad's birthday with a tower in the far distance. At the end, it revealed the puzzle's pattern read, "Happy 50th." Moments like these had a lasting impact and taught him that a contemplative video game is a good thing. He kept up each generation on consoles, citing Ocarina of Time as the best game ever, and the PS2 era for making him worse at playing games. By his recount, going through the educational system in Montreal was difficult. In Quebec, there were so many system reforms while I was in school. Every couple of years, the government would drastically change the focus or methods of the whole system. One year, they threatened to cut arts and sports, and every student in the province went on strike. We blocked a bridge at one point. The inconsistency made things confusing, and as a result, he got terrible grades in every class except art and English. Towards the end, Phil made it a point to draw all day instead of paying attention. It ultimately proved beneficial, but at the time, there was no certainty. Upon graduating from high school, his class had a formative experience. They went on a camping trip after prom, driving an hour out of town to set up tents in the forest. This led to his first encounter with LSD, vividly recounting wandering off into the woods and discovering a rave. It was an early taste of the drug-infused counterculture. This carried into his actual life, frequently taking THC to get his creative juices going, and self-admittedly becoming an alcoholic. Whenever there's booze, I will drink lots of it, to the point of losing hours of my life, waking up locked in a deserted subway station covered in my own vomit. Good times. That's why they call it substance abuse. Also, I can't work when I'm drunk. Soon after, Phil enrolled into college, lasting only a month before dropping out. A year later, he entered into a one-year game design program at the Montreal National Animation and Design Center. It was an intensive experience, with the 20-year-old stating the entire course cost him $16,000 Canadian. He sometimes worked 32-hour shifts, admitting by the end he was just bat and that he learned how to make stuff and put it in a pipeline. Learned 3D, learned animation, wanted to learn design, did not learn design. He graduated from the program in 2004 and shortly after landed the first job of his career at Ubisoft. It was his time there that taught him game design, and he was excited to finally achieve his lifelong dream. Unfortunately, he'd later describe this period as the worst part of his life. It showed him a side of the industry that was deeply impersonal, to the point he almost gave up entirely. Hundreds of people on your team, you don't know any of their names. Years and years thinking this was my dream, only to realize it's a sweatshop. Phil's first credit is a PlayStation tie-in for the movie Open Season in 2006. However, his time there also proved necessary for his eventual escape. You see, at the time, his creative director was working on a side project with another employee named Heather Kelly. They were tasked with creating minigames centered around an annual cultural tradition in Montreal. Due to prior obligations, Phil's director asked if he would help her with the project. With just 5 days left to the deadline, he volunteered to do all of the art. This left Heather to take care of design, and her boyfriend, Damien, to handle the code. The trio spent the next week pulling all-nighters, with Phil crashing at her place several times. Against all odds, it shipped on time, and they had a lot of fun doing it. The trio decided to keep working together, and over the next few months formed what would go on to be called Coco Romy, a collective united around a shared mission: to create small experimental games, to encourage creative games industry-wide, and to promote them as an art form. Their first venture became Gamma 01, a cross between a game jam and a dance party. They decided on the theme audio levels, challenging devs to design a game around the input of a live audio feed. Entrants were given just 2 months to complete the project. The event took place on November 9, 2006. It was organized for the Montreal International Games Summit and Arcadia Fest, a local mini E3 as they would call it. The 7 entries were presented alongside live music performances to generate the gameplay and visuals. Gamma 01 was a success, receiving coverage by local outlets, although that didn't bode well for its creators. For reasons that are unclear, Phil was fired from Ubisoft after the festival, although one post he made a few months after the event may shed some light onto why. Our employer found out and freaked out quite a bit. They sent their PR goons after us, and we were invited to a meeting. A nice enough PR lady explained to me and my partner what we could say, what we couldn't say, how to say it, etc., etc. I politely told her to f*** off, that this was an independent endeavor the company had nothing to do with, and that we wouldn't follow her guidelines. In late 2006, he landed a new job at Artificial Mind Movement. Unfortunately, it was another gig where his work centered on movie tie-ins. At the very least, Coco Romy was allowed to continue so long as they made no mention of their employer. It was also around this time Phil started to familiarize himself with the online indie game dev community. A major pillar at the time was TIG Source, a blog for independent video games. The site had its own forum, which became the launchpad of several award-winning titles, including Notch's Minecraft. In early 2007, Phil registered an account on their forums. He adopted a pseudonym to avoid being linked back to his employer, resulting in the creation of the name Phil Fish. It's also worth noting that his French surname literally translates to fish. He introduced himself to the forum in February 2007, sharing details about Coco Romy and their plans for future Gamma events. His boisterous personality led him to quickly make a name for himself. Indie design is my rock and roll. It's my great big f*** you to the rest of the industry. My main motivation is that someday I might be able to ditch the biz and do my own thing full time. Phil was quite opinionated, never mincing criticism for both the industry and his peers. This isn't the praise form. Most of the posters here are way too nice and afraid to say what they think. I see the worst looking game ever and everybody is wearing their white gloves, terrified they might hurt the poor guy's feeling. While I'm all for constructive criticism, sometimes people go, "This sucks," because it sucks. To be fair, this went both ways, praising the projects he liked when warranted. This made him a divisive figure early on, especially since he was one of the few non-coders. At the same time, his work ethic couldn't be denied. In April, Phil discussed his plans of developing 2 games at once. The first was designed with Heather, while the other was a secretive project with Toronto developer Sean McGrath. Me and him met at Gamma, and a few times after that. We bonded over our sincere hatred of almost everything around us, so we wanted to collaborate. He was also in the midst of planning the next Gamma, creating 4 prototypes for the event. TIG's source was pivotal in getting the word out, and as he became more active on the forums, he dreamed of one day living near other devs in real life. By then, he was maxing out credit cards to attend GDC and other gaming conferences. Phil was chasing his dream, no matter the cost. What drove him was his deep appreciation for art like animation and music. To him, video games were the ultimate medium.
It's awesome. I want to be part of it. I want to have a say in what becomes of video games.
He was well acquainted with the era's millennial counterculture, spending most of his time at local shows and having been arrested for graffiti. So he tried to apply those philosophies to his work. Instead of professional design docs, he developed a personal hand-drawn style. Eventually, he started drawing them on napkins. By far, the most exciting endeavor for him was the aforementioned secret project with Sean McGrath. What needs to be understood is that Mr. McGrath had come up with the concept of a 2D/3D rotating mechanic, and brought on Phil to handle all the art and design. Phil was unsatisfied with conceptually similar games like Super Paper Mario, hoping to fully utilize the gimmick. He envisioned a blue sky, green grass kind of game, and spent a weekend watching Ghibli films. It filled him with the uncontrollable urge to do pixel art, despite having never done that style before. Another key influence was Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto. They challenged themselves to have a prototype ready before the deadline of that year's Independent Games Festival. This gave just 3 months to make a playable demo, a difficult task even if it was a single working level. The two put all of their other work aside, at least as much as their day jobs and school would allow. Phil admitted it completely destroyed his social life. "I spend 8 hours a day working on a game, then I go home and work on another game. I used to go out, get wasted, dance, etc., etc. Well, dance no more. I've actually been trying to condition myself to sleep less and less so I can work more." That July, he shared the first mock-up of what eventually became known as Fez, and a week and a half later, he made an official thread dedicated to the project. Fez is Renaud Badar on code, and myself on everything else. The game is a puzzle/platformer/explorer, sort of. I can't say too much about it yet. The name was a play off Rez, a music-based game Fish enjoyed, as well as his own fondness for the hat. "I used to love the Addams Family as the weird little kid I was. I always really liked this image of the intellectual sitting down in a big chair to read a book, wearing a bathrobe and a fez. Man, I need to get me a fez." To put it simply, the fez was Phil's fedora. It's worth noting that at this stage, McGrath had already left the project. Sean had this idea for an abstract puzzler that used a similar 4 sides mechanic, but I wanted to make a more traditional platformer using that twist. We had a falling out, and that project died. Renaud replaced him as the programmer, though they continued to build off of McGrath's original mechanic, a decision that proved controversial later on. Until then, they focused on getting the demo ready for IGF 2008, bringing on musician 6955, real name Jason DeGroot, to handle the score and sound effects. Over time, the very first prototype took shape, landing a protagonist with the titular hat named Gomez.
That's where he gets his 3D power from, because the Fez is a cube, and well, that's it really. That's my logic for that.
That October, Phil announced the first demo was completed, releasing a teaser trailer later that week. Within 24 hours, it amassed over 10,000 views, receiving coverage from several gaming outlets. A month later, CocoRomy held their next Gamma event, receiving a total of 18 entries. Jason DeGroot was one of the featured musicians, and upon seeing Fez's teaser trailer, became a producer on the project. Phil quickly rose in notoriety, being invited for an interview on Mnet, a Quebec television show. During the program, the crew and an employee from Ubisoft Montreal praised Assassin's Creed, remarking it sure beats something made by two guys in a basement. Later on, she asked Phil what he did for work, to which he replied, "I make games in a basement." In a conversation with Arthouse Games, he noted they had just welcomed a fourth member to CocoRomy, Cindy Poramba, who was more on the academic side of things. Notably, McGrath, who had quit the project, can be seen in the comments to this article, simply describing the production as a, quote, train wreck. In December 2007, IGF announced that year's finalists, with Fez nominated in two categories, the Design Innovation Award and Excellence in Visual Art. Shortly after, Phil was profiled by the Montreal Mirror as part of their annual Noisemakers edition, estimating it would be released in 2008. He was a big shot, talking to the press as a figurehead in his field. IGF's award ceremony was held at that year's GDC in February 2008. However, when Phil told his boss he would be gone that week, they informed him that due to scheduling issues, he wouldn't be allowed to go. After an intense back and forth, Phil ultimately decided to quit. His last day at A2M was on February 15th, and the next day he got on a plane to San Francisco, a moment he credited as "when I became indie." I will probably have to find some random part-time job, which sucks, because I really don't feel like working in a kitchen or whatever. It's fortunate that he did, as Fez won that year's award for Excellence in Visual Art.
And the winner of the IGF Art Award is Fez.
The guy who wouldn't let me go to GDC ended up walking by the IGF booth the day after we won. He kept his distance. I just stood there smiling with our f***ing trophy. One of the best moments of my life. The hype surrounding Fez took off, with fans making their own plushies of Gomez on Etsy. Fish was renowned in the media, and started being invited to industry conferences to speak as the indie guy, despite having never released a full game before. He often showed up to these talks drunk and swearing a lot. In March, he did voice acting for Owl Country, a game made by several devs who met at GDC 2008. Now, it's worth mentioning Fez's hype was concurrent with a surge of public interest in indie as a whole. This was in part due to the advent of digital distribution. Before Steam took off, companies feared upsetting retailers by running an online marketplace. With people gaining access to high-speed internet, Valve was able to bypass this, opening the doors for platforms like Xbox Live Arcade, the PlayStation Network, and WiiWare. This sparked the boom of indie games with titles such as Audiosurf, Castle Crashers, Braid, and World of Goo all released in 2008. Phil was well aware the hype around Fez might not last, yet it became clear his original one-year deadline was infeasible. By August, his thread was filled with people asking if it had been cancelled. It didn't help he also began speaking about a separate game he was making with Alec Haloka. His activity on TIG forums slowed down, as many assumed the worst. Yet behind the scenes, Fez was on the cusp of an entirely new phase of production. It was at this point Phil was able to secure a loan from the Canadian government, launching his own startup company called Polytron Corporation. It was co-founded by Jason DeGroot. This allowed him to work on Fez full-time, opening their own offices in Montreal. That was on top of hosting Gamma 3D in November. Throughout the fall, Fish claimed they didn't have internet in their office for some reason, and upon his return to the web revealed just how chaotic the previous year had been. In the year 2008, I started a company. I quit my job. I flew to GDC. I won an award. My father survived leukemia. My grandfather did not survive his cancer. I found offices for Polytron. I had Gamma 3D. I had 4 people crash my place. I had 9 different housemates. I found love. Fez's projected release date was pushed to early 2010, with the announcement that it would be coming to Xbox Live Arcade. Polytron received additional loans from other sources, though by summer he noted they were already pretty low on money. This led him to explicitly state that a PC port was unviable, though he would later argue this was for the game's benefit. It's made to be played with a controller on a couch on a Saturday morning. I get so many comments shouting at me that I'm an idiot for not making a PC version. You'd make so much more money. It's a console game for console. End of story. It was around this time he became active on Twitter again after 2 years of inactivity. At this stage, Phil deliberately kept most details of the game close to his chest due to its emphasis on secrets and discovery. While the decision makes sense today, it didn't inspire confidence in those eagerly hoping for new updates. Instead, Polytron presented what he had made with Alec, the mobile game Power Pill. In December of 2009, Kokoromi announced Gamma 4. It smashed previous records with a total of 154 entries. As a result, they were invited by Indie Game Summit to bring the event to San Francisco. Unfortunately, such a task was out of budget, so in February 2010 they launched a Kickstarter. It was a success, raising $10,000, and Gamma went off without a hitch as the release date for Fez came and went. Throughout 2010, public updates on the game were minimal. Its thread on TIG forums was filled with users who suspected it was cancelled. To satiate them, he provided a few rare glimpses of gameplay while stating there would be no enemies or combat. Thanks for all the kind words. It's really nice to have some positive internet reinforcement for a change. While little was being said publicly, something was brewing at the Polytron offices. In May 2010, a word began to spread of a new Kickstarter titled Indie Game the Movie. Entranced by GDC, Blinkworks Media sought to make a documentary that captured the human side of the creative process and the connections between game and game maker. With a goal set at $15,000, it managed to raise over 23. The filmmakers would go on to interview over 30 developers. After recording 300 hours of footage, they decided on cutting the film down to focus on just 4 individuals. Jonathan Blow, creator of Braid, Edmund McMillan and Tommy Rafunas, creators of Super Meat Boy, and of course, Phil Fish. They first visited the Polytron offices in early October, giving a glimpse into how the public pressure for a release date was beginning to affect the red-headed protagonist.
It's taking too long. F off! Jesus Christ! It really gets to me. I guess, that's the price you pay for being indie.
By this point, Fez had been in production for 1,137 days. The film notes that so far, they had missed every Xbox milestone. This was partially due to the game being completely redesigned 3 separate times.
Everything was kind of coming along, and then my dad was diagnosed with leukemia. Shortly after that, my parents divorced. Shortly after that, my girlfriend left me about a year ago. Sometime after that, there started being a lot of tension between me and the guy who owned the other half.
The partner in question was Jason DeGroot. While the exact reason for his departure is unclear, evidently it was on bad terms. It was a huge blow as he was responsible for the business side of the operation. This left Phil in charge of every single aspect of the company. Almost immediately after, they lost their funding, leaving him in the position we see in the film.
We don't have any money. I'm overworked and overstressed about the business. That's like my incentive to finish it, is then I get to not kill myself.
As a result of their partnership ending, DeGroot's music was removed from the game. The final score was instead created by Rich Disasterpiece Vreeland. At the end of Phil's first segment, it revealed that in 5 months he hoped to show Fez at PAX East 2011, making its first public appearance in 4 years. This was already a stressful prospect, as he had no idea how the game would be received. But to make matters worse, when the day of the convention came, Jason still hadn't signed the dissolution papers. That meant if his ex-partner desired, their plans could be shut down entirely if he was denied permission to run the booth. The film follows Fish's day-by-day in Boston on March 11th to the 13th. Things reach a boiling point when he learns Jason is going to be at the convention for his own booth, while still not having provided his signature to the contract.
And I'm gonna cold-blood murder him. I'm gonna guy, seriously.
Phil ultimately decides to set up the booth anyway and thankfully gets the signature. It still wasn't perfect, with the prototype having numerous game-breaking bugs, but they were successful in revitalizing hype for Fez, proving to the world the game did in fact exist.
I don't know, I'm hoping that it kind of, like, oh yeah, Fez is back, and kind of, yeah, establish that everything's real.
Of course, upon returning, Polytron was still faced with the fact that they were going bankrupt. It may have been cancelled entirely if not for what happened next. You see, the company's next-door neighbor was a developer named Trapdoor Inc. The relatively unknown company had just landed a deal to publish one of its upcoming titles through EA. Because of this, they offered to use their resources to rescue Fez. The two formed a partnership, offering to help manage the business and merchandise while letting Polytron retain its intellectual property. Fish has stated this partnership is what ultimately saved the game. That year, Fez won awards from Fantastic Arcade, Indiecade, and was a PAX 10 selection at the 2011 Penny Arcade Expo. Still, when he once again announced Fez would be delayed, this time to 2012, even Kotaku made sure to roll their eyes. And in the following months, Fish would manage to get himself into even more hot water. Despite having already entered in the past, Phil contemplated submitting Fez again for IGF 2012. This sparked debate on TIG forums, with many users arguing it shouldn't be eligible. After all, it served to take attention away from other up-and-comers that never had their chance in the limelight. It also should be noted that there was a $95 entry fee and a total prize pool of $50,000. In response, Phil argued the game had completely changed over the span of time. He also said that by most accounts, they weren't successful and he had only accrued debt. They allow both prototypes and finished games to compete in the same categories. 4 years ago, our first 30 days of work got us an art award. It launched our careers, and we might not be where we are today without that award. Almost 5 years of work will have gone into the final product that Fez has become. None of the art that won that art award is still in there. Despite widespread protest, Fez was allowed to re-enter anyway and qualified as a finalist for both Excellence in Audio and the Grand Prize. When the ceremony was held that March, Fez didn't just win. It took home the Grand Prize, netting him $30,000. This caused a deep divide in the community. Many began positing that there was a secret indie Illuminati, a group of elites who all helped each other behind the scenes. It was such a scandal that an article was written about IGF's critics by gaming outlet Rock Paper Shotgun. It notes a Twitter mob led by developer Anna Anthropophy, who participated in the TIG Forms collab Pirate Cart. Pirate Cart was a collection of 300 games created on short notice to be submitted as a single entry at TGF 2012. The Pirate Cart was a lot of things to a lot of different people. For me, it was definitely a reaction to controversy over Fez. It raised a lot of awareness of those games that would never have been so widely played if the Pirate Cart hadn't existed. And also just awareness of the fact that the IGF is bullshit. Anna is most well known for her involvement on the game Mighty Jilloff, which her ex-partner claimed was directly based on their abusive relationship. Phil was also interviewed for the article, denying that such a group existed. There's so many people on TIG Source that feel like they're being f***ed over by the indie elite. There's no such thing. The fact that indie games has become a scene just pisses me off, because now there's all this scene drama and jealousy and enemies. One of Phil's last posts on the forum would be in response to these accusations, affirming an elite did in fact exist. This place would be so much better if so many people didn't make such a distinction between us and them. I wish I could just come here to hang out like I used to, but I can't anymore. I'm constantly being attacked for this or that, being part of a conspiracy, or having some kind of unfair advantage. Now it's a cesspool and a hive of mediocrity where everybody is allergic to everybody else's success. Yes, there is an elite. There can't not be one. Before we get too deep in this rabbit hole, we should at least finish talking about Fez itself. Don't worry, we'll revisit this supposed indie game Illuminati later on in the video, as it became one of the forgotten foundations of a little event called Gamergate that would occur 2 years later. But for now, detractors couldn't connect enough dots to turn it into a movement, as they had no choice but to sit on the sideline as Mr. Fish would unhumbly proclaim, "I just won the grand prize at IGF tonight. Suck my dick. Choke on it." Throughout its development, Fez had 3 different animators. Paul Robertson, known for Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the game, as well as producing distinctive bumpers for Adult Swim. He was responsible for the game's animals and some of Gomez's animations. Additional help came from Adam Saltzman and Graham Lackey. I'd also like to mention the game's cover was drawn by the creator of Scott Pilgrim himself, Brian Lee O'Malley. After 4 years of development, Fez finally was released on April 13, 2012, to mostly critical acclaim. Many outlets listed it amongst their games of the year, receiving near universal 9 out of 10 reviews. During its year-long exclusivity to Xbox Live Arcade, the game sold 200,000 copies. It eventually released on all platforms, including PC, where it consistently ranked among the top-rated releases. The game's plot centers around collecting cubes in order to rebuild the hypercube and restore order to the universe. There are 64 in total, though only 32 are required to beat the game. This might sound simple, but the point of the experience is exploration, with many mysteries and rabbit holes present throughout. For example, Gomez and the Zoo civilization's backstory is never outright explained. It can only be inferred through details and carvings. The game is also unique for using QR codes in its puzzles, although there are always alternatives for players who didn't have a QR code reader. To this day, over a decade later, there are still unsolved mysteries which continue to intrigue players who have tried their best to brute force every possible answer. It can't be understated how talked about this game was before, during, and after its release, and the same can be said about its rough-around-the-edges creator. While Fish was initially ecstatic about the Xbox, over time his view of Microsoft soured. Several months after its release, the two had a high-profile dispute over the cost of patching the program. Polytron released a fix that resolved many technical issues, but introduced a new problem that corrupted some players' save files. Upon learning this, they retracted, then reissued the patch, stating, "Microsoft would charge us tens of thousands of dollars to recertify the game." He then said it affected less than 1% of users. Microsoft responded publicly, claiming it offered to work with them on a more reasonable price solution. Polytron ultimately faced the brunt of the backlash, although it raised awareness over the business needs of indie developers. Going back a few months before the game's release, Indie Game the Movie premiered at Sundance Film Festival. It would go on to win the World Cinema Documentary Editing Award. The film has been praised for both its portrayal of video games as a medium and the creative process, showcasing an emotional variance not typically acknowledged. It left such an impact that HBO considered adapting the movie into a dramatized half-hour television show. The documentary was released digitally in June of 2012, and later made its way to Netflix as an early example of media going viral on the streaming platform. As millions watched, decisions regarding Fish's sections led the film itself to be the subject of controversy. At this point, it's worth clarifying that while I stated Jason DeGroote's name when explaining the events shown in the doc, you wouldn't know it by watching the film. Throughout, his ex-partner's face is blurred and never mentioned by name. In the digital version, a line at the end states he asked not to participate in the film. The thing is, the day it was released, Sean McGrath took to Twitter to dispute this publicly. "I'm pretty sick of people getting praise and credit for being full of exploitative liars. It's not okay to present the rambling lies of someone as truth with no hint of another side of the story." As it turns out, Jason hadn't asked not to participate in the film. In fact, it was the exact opposite according to him. The filmmakers had never asked him to participate. McGrath later told Polygon there were many issues he had with the film, but this outright lie was what motivated him to speak out publicly. The feud revealed even more context. That the game de Groot was attending PAX East to help with was Dyad, a game by McGrath. His ex-partners were both close personal friends. According to Destructoid, following the film's premiere at Sundance, he had been in contact with the filmmakers to discuss his lack of participation. They eventually agreed he would not be identified, with a note saying he was not asked to participate. In response, the film was updated 3 days later to correct this mistake, though de Groot remarked rejected would be a more honest word. If all that wasn't strange enough, Phil's new partner, who is shown in the film, is Ken Schachter. Schachter is a founder of Trapdoor, and was also the movie's executive producer. This still didn't spell the end of Phil Fish's controversies, though. In March of 2012, at a Q&A for the film, a Japanese man asked the panel what they thought of modern Japanese games. Fish bluntly gave his honest opinion, a response that soon became rather infamous.
They suck. I'm sorry. Like, you guys need to get with the times and make better interfaces and like update your technology. We're totally kicking your ass. Back then, you guys are the king of the world, but your time has passed.
While he never actually said the line, "Japanese games just suck," the sentiment was there, and backlash erupted over what many felt was a snobbish, sweeping generalization. Now, to be fair, there were certainly valid criticisms one could have of the Japanese games industry. Fellow panelist Jonathan Blow even chimes in to elaborate on the thought in a more nuanced, constructive manner.
Now, of course, before this goes up on blogs and stuff, right, there are exceptions, right? There are Japanese games that are different from that. But the trend, just like the trend in America is like, soldier looking down a gun sight, shooting dudes. It's the same feeling.
Street Fighter 4.
Yeah, Street Fighter 4 is pretty good. Yeah.
To play devil's advocate, I don't think Fish was trying to literally say all Japanese games suck. It was a reaction to modern gaming trends, in the same way he would say the American industry sucked while enjoying stuff like Red Dead Redemption. But most people didn't take it that way, and pointed to games that inspired him like Cave Story to prove the hypocrisy of a man they already disliked over previous controversies. To make matters worse, Fish doubled down on Twitter. These tweets revealed he had no idea who the questioner in the audience was, calling him some random Japanese guy. As it turns out, the guy was a Japanese developer named Makoto Goto, who had been in the industry for over 20 years. It was his first trip abroad, having paid his own way from Tokyo. At that moment, Goto didn't actually understand what the slang term suck even meant. He didn't seem offended and rather more uncomfortable, hoping he didn't do anything wrong. For his part, Fish would end up apologizing, which Goto accepted. Other Japanese developers, such as Keiji Inafune, creator of Mega Man, would agree with Fish, praising his blunt honesty. Whatever his intentions, this spur-of-the-moment remark would haunt him for years to come. Perhaps the best example of online sentiment towards Phil at the time is the YouTube channel TheGamerFromMars. While mostly uploading satirical reviews, occasionally they would take the time to articulate genuine criticisms of games or their developers. On April 19th, they uploaded their review of Fez, swaddling the line between mockery and leveraging actual grievances.
Top of his comments about modern Japanese games, Fish also told people to suck his and choke on it since he won 2 Indie Game Awards that his single game shouldn't have even been eligible for. Called gamers the worst people since they frowned on him acting like a brat. People say that you shouldn't judge the game based on the creator, but I think Fish was aware of how unimpressive Fez ended up being, and figured if he at least acted full of himself, people would think the game was more than it really was. As stupid as he acted, it was at least more entertaining than Fez ended up being, and it's probably all anyone will remember the game for.
The video accumulated nearly 200,000 views, and it's been said that after this, Fez went from having a perfect star rating on the Xbox 360 store to only having a 3.9. With Fish chased out of the TIG forums, his new main platform of choice was Twitter. Even with the backlash, he never stopped being as abrasive as he had always been. Then, in May 2013, he left an attention-grabbing message. People see me in a documentary and they think they know everything about me. I feel so naked and constantly under attack. I'm going to get off Twitter for a while, I think. 2 months later, Game Informer published an article titled, Indie Game the Movie, Where Are They Now? They noted Phil had stopped speaking to the press and seemingly left the internet. Shortly after, Fish returned, and less than 3 weeks later had what is now known as his most infamous meltdown. The story began on July 24th, when a writer from Game Informer reached out to Fish and Blow for comment on rumored changes to the Xbox One's policies. They both decried this request publicly. Blow: instead of asking developers for useless punditry about a rumor, how about digging into the actual details, etc. Fish: also, why are you asking me for comments when you're just going to copy a tweet of mine anyways? This is particularly confusing for Fish, as a month earlier, he would outright state Microsoft doesn't want indie games on Xbox One, making reaching out to him fairly reasonable. In light of this, on July 27th, Marcus Spear, the annoyed gamer, ranted about them on Game Trailer's podcast.
And I've just got a little message for the Blowfish. Gents, you were the guys who did Indie Games the movie. And some of you looked relatively normal in it. One of you looked like a total tosspot in it. But you can't have it both ways. You're successful game designers. You're indie game designers. Hurrah, good for you, you hipsters.
To put it lightly, Phil Fish did not take this well. He responded in a storm of tweets, likely his live reaction to the clip. Hey face, the thing with us tosspots hipsters is that we're not beholden to media leeches like you. And you're right, we're very successful. And we're not going anywhere. Get used to it, you middle-aged parasite. Compare your life to mine and then yourself. Attacking my character and the quality of my work. Nice job, Game Trailers. Annoyed gamer, unable to create or add to the world in a meaningful way. You sit in judgment, masturbating. It didn't end there either. Fish then claimed he was speaking to his attorney before demanding a public apology. I want you to apologize on camera. I'm being attacked constantly and I can't fight back ever? Yeah, that seems fair. I hate this industry. I don't want to get off Twitter. I love Twitter, but it invites so much ugliness into my life. Before long, he was replying to and arguing with random users, culminating in a final tweet announcing Fez 2 was cancelled. He then made his account private before making a post on the official Polytron website. Fez 2 is cancelled. I am done. I take the money and I run. This is as much as I can stomach. This isn't the result of any one thing, but the end of a long, bloody campaign. You win. Now, whether or not Fez 2 actually existed has long since been up for debate. In a Reddit AMA from earlier that year, he wrote, "A lot of non-creative work. I haven't really made anything since the game came out. A necessary evil, I suppose. But life has generally been really good." Following this in June, Polytron officially announced Fez 2, even releasing a teaser trailer. Years later, Fish admitted his heart wasn't in it, and a sequel simply felt like the thing to do. Strike while the iron's hot, if you will. In the end, it was less about Fez 2 so much as leaving the industry, and it was less about his spat with Marcus Spear than a culmination of all the negative attention he had accrued online. News of his departure made headlines, even reaching outlets like NBC, due to how prolific he was as one of the faces of the indie game scene. Many would try to view the situation and Fish in a more sympathetic light, viewing this as the outcome of the internet's war against creatives. A popular video on this subject was This Is Phil Fish by YouTuber Innuendo Studios.
If you don't hate Phil Fish, you probably either know somebody who does, or you have never heard of him.
It uses his story as a case study on fame and the effects it has on the people who become famous. Despite Fish's claim he would leave for good, the artist would make a brief reappearance throughout 2014. The first was in June to state Let's Players were committing theft and owed him money. If you generate money from putting my content on your channel, you owe me money. Simple as that. Ad revenue should be shared with developers. This should be built into YouTube. Anything else is piracy. This take only alienated him further, even from other indie devs who were quick to express they actually liked YouTubers playing their games as they saw it as free promotion, a viewpoint that would eventually win out in the industry. Then, 2 months later, he got himself involved in a little-known internet controversy known as Gamergate. #Gamergate was an online movement meant to address ethics in video game journalism, or was a harassment campaign against women in gaming, depending on who you talk to. It was sparked by an affair between developer Zoe Quinn and 5 guys in the industry. It sought to address cronyism and perceived lack of integrity in the space, but quickly devolved into a debate about sexism and identity politics. As a personal friend of Zoe, Fish was an early defender, returning to Twitter to express his support. "I wish video games were a building so I could burn it down with all you people in it. You're so sad. You only made her more powerful. Can you believe these nuts are actually claiming this is about ethics? Hey, I should probably go to bed now." Incredible outpour of hate this morning, proving me 100% right. You made your point, gamers. You're monsters. We get it. This also included a reply to someone he knew in real life claiming Zoe Quinn sexually harassed them at a wedding earlier that year. "You're no friend of mine. You crashed that wedding. Nobody invited you. Nobody wanted you there, you little shit." In other words, he was asking for it. 3 days later, Polytron's website was hacked, with the perpetrator leaking all of Phil Fish's personal info. The homepage was replaced by art referencing 5 Guys Burgers and Fries. The hacker claimed to be the head mod over at V and the leader of 4chan and Anonymous. This public execution of Polytron and Phil Fish is retaliation for his attempted cover-up of 5 Guys Burgers and Fries. Let this be a warning to all SJW game devs out there. We are coming for you. They also took credit for doxing Zoe Quinn. Attached was a download link to a 1.5 gigabyte file containing Phil Fish and his company's passwords, as well as government documents, internal emails, bank information, and other financial info. Some have since claimed this hack was staged, but honestly, I don't buy that. Many of the so-called discrepancies were debunked, and if it was staged, the idea of doing so by releasing a trove of actual sensitive information just seems so far-fetched. Renaud, who was otherwise uninvolved, would affirm the hack was legitimate. "We didn't just get attacked on the website front. The contents of the corporate Dropbox was hit." Surprisingly, Fish's Twitter remained uncompromised, likely due to 2-factor authentication. He would make what was justifiably irate tweets in response to such an invasive attack. This is video games. This is your audience. To every aspiring game developer out there, don't give up. It's not worth it. Give up on your dreams. They are actually nightmares. Just don't do it. Run away. I would like to announce that Polytron and the Fez IP are now for sale. No reasonable offer will be turned down. I am done. I want out. Never again. I am deleting this account. If you see anybody on Twitter pretending to be me, it isn't. You should all be ashamed. No matter what your opinion is on the man himself, this showed just how quickly Gamergate was escalating for the worse, and why so many were willing to die for their side. The sheer insanity made any attempt at civil conversation impossible. Fish was ostensibly a victim, but much of the conversation around it was poised on the theory he committed the act against himself. Gamergate would continue digging into Fish, attempting to uncover old scandals as well as find new ones. The first centered around questions over Sean McGrath's involvement in the development of Fez. The issue resurfaced due to an interview with ex-Destructoid writer Alistair Pinsoff. Pinsoff claimed that after the two had a falling out, McGrath allegedly told Fish to cancel the project. The agreement was that McGrath would take his 2D/3D rotating mechanic and Fish would take his Trixel engine. When McGrath saw the game appear at IGF 2008, he was furious and felt backstabbed. Alex Holoka also commented on the matter publicly. "I remember getting pulled aside by Sean McGrath randomly at some GDC to be told that Phil ripped Fez off him. Despite how bad this looked, McGrath himself disputed the narrative in an interview with Kotaku. He states that they never discussed canceling Fez before sharing the prototype they made together, which doesn't resemble Fez at all beyond the rotational mechanic. I said we were working on something, it wasn't called Fez, there was no concept of Gomez. what he even looked like, any of the hat stuff. There was none of that. None of that existed. There was no Fez. It's not like he stole a complete game or something. Like, I think people are overreacting. I'm not cool with what happened, but let's be realistic about it. The next scandal to put Fish under scrutiny relates back to Fez being allowed to enter IGF twice, as well as claims of there being an indie Illuminati. You see, the leaked documents revealed exactly how the company was funded. This included a group of investors in 2009, who offered a loan in return for a percentage of revenue when Fez released. Among them were prominent indie developers who would later form the Indie Fund, a group that provides similar loans to aspiring indie devs. This itself wasn't a secret. Fish himself referenced the group publicly in 2013 in a Reddit AMA. What I referred to in the movie was a kind of proto-indie fund group that helped us out for a while. Private investors, friends and colleagues. What is known today as the Indie Fund evolved from that first group. Now, something I've neglected up until this point is that the winners of IGF were determined by a panel of 5 to 10 jurors appointed by the finalist committee. This jury may include indie and professional game designers, indie-friendly journalists, and other individuals familiar with game design. The accusation is that some of these investors may have been part of the jury for IGF 2012, meaning they awarded him prize money to get a return on their profit. However, there is so far no actual evidence of this being the case. A claim at the time was that the jury consisted of 5 members of the Indie Fund as well as 3 members of Polytron staff, with them making up 8 out of the 10 judges. But when you actually scrutinize this claim, the only source for it is an anonymous testimony from LordCat.com, a former contributor to That Guy with the Glasses.
A bat credit card?
Needless to say, I'm not convinced. A similar accusation was leveraged towards Fez's victory at IndieCade 2011, which utilized a similar jury system. But looking through the archives, it doesn't seem like cash prizes were a part of the event. The only exception I can find was a special sponsored award from 2018. In this case, Kelly Santiago, one of Polytron's investors, was indeed a chair of the awards jury that year. When reached out to for comment, IndieCade said she recused herself from voting, citing that conflict of interest. Whether you believe that or not is up to you, but it feels dishonest looking at infographics pairing these two events together, especially when people were accusing them of racketeering. Antichamber was another game allowed to enter IGF twice. In 2011, it was a finalist for the Nuovo Award, but didn't win, and in 2012 took home the Technical Excellence Award. This means investors may have racketeered $3,000. Team Meat did name Antichamber specifically when discussing their grievances with IGF, although it's completely unrelated to the conspiracy.
I know last year Antichamber won, and that's great, whatever. I actually wanted either Fez or Spelunky to win, because they were both built from nothing, ground up, ridiculously polished, ran well, all of these things. And yes, Antichamber is very, very polished, but there's this one glaring huge thing. It runs off of Unreal 3. Like, how can you give an award for technical excellence to something that all of the heavy lifting is done?
That isn't to say there's no scrutiny to be had for how these events were run. The conspiracies of the Illuminati originated before Gamergate, and I can believe there were major conflicts of interest. In Rock Paper Shotgun's article from 2012, the writer notes 4 people who worked on Fez were on the previous year's jury. The fact Fez was allowed to re-enter again in light of that info is reason enough for suspicion. Factor in the 30 grand prize and I could understand why eyebrows were raised.
These people, I have no idea who they are. A lot of the judges are just like writers or I don't know what. And there's nobody's actually going by these rules that are set in place. They're just going by their own personal rule set where they think, that it's quite literally, there's arguments that are literally, hey, this person needs help. And I think letting them win will help, even though they directly say this game is better than this other game, but this game needs some help. Let's make them win. And it's just like, oh my god, there's so much wrong with that. And it's just so fucked up. It pains me to have Phil Fish, directly tell me that he voted against, like, he straight up just told us, like, oh yeah, I was one of the many people, according to him, that voted against Super Meat Boy because I knew you guys were going to be fine.
But that's where the evidence ends, and whatever you infer from that is ultimately up to you. In late 2014, footage of Fish surfaced online showing him DJing at a party hosted by game industry veteran Tim Schafer. It showed that whatever he did next may not relate to games after all. Despite swearing off from the industry, many games over the years list him in their special thanks, including Gang Beasts, Hyper Light Drifter, and Res Infinite. In 2016, he dipped his toe back into game development with the VR game Super Hypercube, released by Kokoromi. Later that year, Polytron canceled plans for an Oculus port due to its founder, Palmer Luckey, being tied to a pro-Trump organization. Following this, Fish has largely stayed true to his claim that he would be leaving the game industry for good. Over the years, he would only briefly reappear for a rare interview, such as when Fez turned 10 years old. He reflected on the game's longevity, while rejecting some of his prestige. It's very flattering, but I don't know if it's true. That's like me grilling one great steak and calling myself a steak master. The more time passes, the more impressed I am with what we managed to pull off. We were just kids and we had no idea what we were doing. I cannot stress enough how little we knew what we were doing. To be fair, I still don't know what I'm doing. In 2023, he made an appearance on the podcast My Perfect Console, hinting at the idea he may have been working on projects over those last 9 years, although it might not be video games. That was very liberating to break away from Fez 2, and then realize that I can do something else. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be a video game. I don't want to say what, because I'm still working on it, but let's go in a completely different direction. With that, we conclude the story of Phil Fish, or at least the story so far. Who knows if one day he will return to the internet with something new to show, whatever it may be. In conclusion, I find this enigmatic game dev so interesting because he had such a profound impact on the indie game movement despite only ever creating one game of note. I guess he shares that distinction with Notch in a weird way. Phil lacked the ability to regulate his speech or emotions on the internet, a trait fine for a behind-the-scenes creative, but a mortal sin for a public figure. In hindsight, he wasn't nearly as bad as his critics claimed, with accusations of collusion and faking being doxxed for sympathy having never been substantiated. Was he perfect? No. Was he a good businessman? No. Did he handle himself well in public? No. But did he help bring attention to the now flourishing indie game scene that lives on to this very day? To that, I would say yes.